Nothing was too outrageous. An Earl custom-built car would cost $28,000. And he had more work than he could handle.
A major hero at the time was Fatty Arbuckle. He was a comedian, big fellow, and so what Earl was able to do was design a car that had a tremendously large chassis. It was a big car, and so when Mr. Arbuckle got into it, he looked normal. So the sense of scale was appropriate for the style of car. He built, I think, 2 or 3 cars for him, and they still exist. They're prized items.
Styling details that Earl popularized would be imitated for years to come, like the landau roof and a rakish slanted windshield.
If you make the lady in the back seat something special, you could give her a cameo window, which he did. This is an oval-shaped window behind the rear door window. And many pictures survive that show whoever the lady was looking out of the window, beautifully framed with this oval shape. It's a very smart idea.
While Hollywood was on the cutting edge of automotive fashion, the cars most Americans drove tended to be homely affairs with little style.
The 20s were really an ungainly time when you went from the old brass cars, which were really quite beautiful, into these homely cars of the 20s that were starting to be enclosed and all that, and they were just kind of pedestrian vehicles. They were practical, getting better all the time, but they had no flair.
Years before, Henry Ford had touched off a revolution with a car that every man could afford. Now, the new president of General Motors would touch off the next. Alfred Sloan, a marketing genius, set out to mass-produce automobiles as beautiful as the custom cars of Hollywood.
He knew the public's appetite. He recognized that fundamental feature that they like something new. We all do. If you offer a new play, a new piece of music, anything that you can think of that's artful, and if it's a new statement, it's an excitement.
General Motors, it's hard to imagine now, but they were hungry at the time, trying to make those cars better and offer more than Ford did.
Alfred Sloan had a hunch that people would pay that little bit extra for style and pizzazz. And Harley Earl was hired to design a smaller, less expensive version of the Cadillac. The 1927 LaSalle, the first mass-produced car designed by a stylist, was an instant success.
Alfred Sloan was trying to appeal to all types of clientele, and he had the ladies in mind as well as the men, and he visualized a long, long time ago that the women's market was going to be 50% of the market. By God, he's right. I think it's 52 now.
Advertisers were realizing more and more that women were the buyers of a great number of products and that they needed to pitch them towards women. And they stereotyped women as being particularly style conscious.
In 1927, Sloan put Harley Earl in charge of a new department, the art and color section, the first of its kind in Detroit. It was the beginning of a corporate career that would make Earl one of the most powerful men in the industry.
Harley Earl really started the first sizable styling department. Before that, all the styling was done up at the factory by the engineers that were putting the car together, who may have been terrific engineers, but they frankly didn't know a car from a canoe when it came to styling.
For the next 4 decades, Earl's department would be responsible for the design of 50 million cars.
He knew that he was designing for the common man and the middle class. So he gave them cars that made every trip an excitement. It didn't make a difference whether you had a shabby house, you didn't have much money, but if you could jump into the car and be somebody, you arrived in this exciting automobile. He gave them that opportunity, and it didn't cost them an awful lot. It's a lot cheaper to buy a car than it is a house. So he gave them imagery, wonderful, exciting imagery.
Earl began to challenge the most basic assumptions about mass-producing automobiles. First, the matter of color.
Advertisers had discovered by the early 1920s the color could make people feel better about the products that they owned. There was a great move towards emphasizing the bringing of color to the kitchen. The same thing for bathrooms. Bathrooms modeled on the great luxurious scenes in movies. If there were going to be colors within your house, why not colors that would individualize your automobile also?
General Motors began to offer cars in rich, vibrant colors.
One year, they came out with a beautiful catalog that was just called Nature's Studies, and it was just beautiful colors in automobiles.
Spurred by his top management, Henry Ford gave the Model T a minor facelift. Larger fenders, nickel-plated radiators, even a little color.
And so we had the spectacle of the Model T like a prim spinster wearing a nice new hat going off to the market. And none too successfully, but still looking more colorful than it had in the past. But the guts of the car was practically the same. Henry Ford simply could not sniff the winds of change.
In spite of pressure from his son Edsel and from Ford dealers across the country, the old man stubbornly held on to the idea that price alone would sell cars.
General Motors positioned Chevrolet slightly above Ford with the idea of suggesting to people who had already had the opportunity to own a Model T that they could now move up a notch, that a Chevrolet was a slightly different class position.
And while the Chevrolet and the other cars may cost a couple $100 more than the Model T, many people thought that they were worth it.
The pecking order for buying these cars was important. When you had a Chevrolet, if you got a Pontiac, it better look more expensive and this and have this feature and that feature. And or if you really wanted an Oldsmobile, you had to go up from the cost of that nice Pontiac, and that Oldsmobile better offer some new things.
It didn't matter so much who you were or where you came from. You could now improve your position by trading up. General Motors offered a car for every rung on the social ladder, and a brand new model every year.
So you own a car for maybe a couple of years, and it's not worn out by any means, but somehow that new Buick really looks good to you if it's well designed. So you trade it in. The car might be built forever, and some of those old cars are still running, but the idea of marketing them on the strength of newness and excitement and style, nothing wrong with that.
For the first time, Americans were going into debt for something other than a house. 75% of the cars sold in the mid-1920s were bought on the installment plan. Ford was being trounced by glamour, comfort, and easy credit.
Henry Ford finally saw the handwriting on the wall. Model T sales were flagging in 1926 and into 1927, and not even he could ignore that fact as much as he was dedicated to the idea that the Model T was just what the American public wanted.
On the afternoon of May 26, 1927, the 15 millionth Model T rolled off the assembly line. Ford announced it would be the last.
When the news went out, there were many Model T owners who were dismayed that the last Model T had been produced. A man in Montclair, New Jersey, promptly bought 8 Model Ts so that he would presumably have one for the remainder of his life. A woman in Toledo, Ohio, bought 6 for the same reason.
A stunned America waited to see what Henry Ford would do next.
Coming up next,
It was just awesome. Those cars would do 100 miles an hour in second gear.
Driving Passion will continue on TBS.
In the 1920s, while many Americans were going into debt to buy mass-produced cars, the ultra-rich were acquiring some of the most elegant automobiles ever made.
The Duesenbergs, always a spectacle.
The great cars of the classic era.
$300,000, 320. I am selling, fair warning, at $330,000.
It was an absolutely glorious age. I mean, if you go to any old car show now and you look at any of the cars of the 20s or 30s, I mean, these are sculptures. These are things of beauty. These are pieces of art.
Nobody could afford them. They were made in small numbers. Today, a Lincoln or a Cadillac, they're everywhere. There's almost as many of those as there are Chevys too. But boy, that wasn't the case in those days. When you saw Packard 12 or a Cadillac 16 or a Duesenberg, you never forgot it. Everybody just was in awe of those things.